possible. So I'm talking now. I'm not sure if I can be.
You're clear. You're much clearer.
Yeah, it's disgusting. I check the mic. I do everything. It's just there's no rhyme nor reason to this. Okay. So at the moment, we'll just get on with where we were. So,
Yeah. I mean, as it's been picked up in the thread, sort of the line about what does God want with a spaceship, which is what we're sort of parodying in the thumbnail, it does work, but it's after a lot of crap to get there, and it's sort of like the other thing is it's very like Shatner just confusing a supercomputer as he did any number of times.
yeah. Well, thank you, everybody who's hung around. I can't. I test everything. I do everything. I do everything right. It's just the computer or the village. It's actually pathetic. We'll just get on with what we can. Obviously, since I'm talking about trouble, I might as well really go for the damned trouble, which is what RTD likes to do with the pantheon of gods and ram it down the Doctor Who throat with nonsense like Maestro, like Lux. Maybe we'll mention the Toymaker later, but this nonsense, Hugh, and I do think it is a nonsense. I see it as shorthand. I see it as a way of really not just intervening in a narrative, it's like a juggernaut, a wrecking ball into a narrative. Because everything established in your universe, from Gallifrey to being a Time Lord with two hearts, everything that's normally established is wrecked by a godlike figure coming in because the rules are just thrown away.
Yeah, and if you take the Maestro episode, what it does is it changes the rules so much that the plotting begins not to make any sense. So there was no reason for the Beatles to be making crap music at all, because nobody listened to it. But they had to be making music, otherwise they wouldn't be in the studio. So therefore, you had to write something that went against the whole structure of the new narrative you brought in because you couldn't make any sense of it. It's an appalling piece of writing.
I mean, and this is it, and we're starting where we finished. Everybody, we will go all the way back to 1963, but it's undeniable that this is where we ended up. 2 seasons of fantasy, hocus pocus, no real narrative logic. I could say that is me saying the writer wanted a free rein to do shorthand, lazy writing with no explanation and no need for an explanation. It's a god, shut up. That's what I really feel I was facing, Hugh, for the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I think it goes slightly back longer in Russell's writing for Doctor Who. Not so much the gods, but obviously, as we've talked before about Space Jesus, is that the solutions to the problems were already on a level where it was just magic. Let's have lots of people thinking about David Tennant so that he becomes young. That's not metaphor. It's just rip-off and bad writing.
Yeah. And while we're talking about the pantheon of gods and various sins and where we stand with Doctor Who, folks, and please join in. Because of the mic playing up and our little delay, I'm going to get going first, and I really will get involved with the thread in a moment. But of course, we've got the Space Jesus. You see, this is the other thing, Hugh. If we're going to talk about gods, we've got what have they done to our actual main character. He's become... Well, it seems to me we've gone a bit Marvel. We've gone a bit Superman. We've turned the Doctor into something possibly immortal. It worries me sick, the Space Jesus thing.
Yeah, and obviously, the whole immortal thing then runs into the Timeless Child and what that is, and that being a mess. It's the other aspect to this, which we have discussed before, is the problem of the Cartmel master plan and the way that puts the Doctor in a different light. And I think that's the big weakness in the last couple of seasons for Sylvester McCoy, where he does a really good job, but with a character that's not really Doctor Who.
Yeah, we may be mentioning the gods of Ragnarok today. If Andrew Cartmel is around, please come and give your input. But anyway, Lux, this was probably the better iteration of a god. Again, though, the problem is, Hugh, if you're going to do a one episode story with a god a week, what's this? You know, what god am I facing this week? It really is tedious. And of course, you establish a nice bit of world, bit of world building, bit of jeopardy maybe sometimes. I mean, he was almost crucified in this Lux episode, Doctor Who. He was up there, wasn't he? Held there, was almost forewarning what was coming later. And before you know it, just blow up the cinema, really, is basically what you have to do. It's just a quickie, isn't it? That's it.
Yeah, it's like we've seen that with Omega at the end, and we saw that at Sutekh at the end, which again is, it's a spoon. How are you dealing with a spoon? It doesn't matter because nothing matters.
No, it is this how everybody feels? I'm in one of those moods today. When a mic doesn't work, he'll get me really ratty. You plan all day and then, a bit of tech decides it can't be asked working. So I'm going to give RTD full barrels again. I've been so moderate so far. But how else is everybody feeling about Lux, the Pantheon of Gods, the Space Jesus element to Doctor Who? I just find it utterly lazy. I'm a science fiction fan. I like to create its own internal logic. I love to see the world built, and within that, the Doctor is confined. But when you suddenly say, oh, it's a god, and it's all fantasy genre, it just feels like, well, okay, how will you ever beat a god? And don't give me, Hugh, that hocus pocus. I think people are going to say, where's your head? It's going to be like, what, what nose? They can't see you.
Mm-hmm.
Hugh?
Yep.
We can't see you.
Right.
I get complaint. It's like, no, but that if there's no logic and there's no possibility, if you're going against a god, you're going to lose. You have to. I mean, you can't say, oh, because Ruby Sunday happens to be this mystery because she doesn't know who her mum is, Sutekh was, found life problematic. Go away.
Yeah, I see the problem what you've got is there has to be an allowance for a certain amount of soft magic and stuff like this. So as I've talked before about reversing the polarity of the neutron flow isn't that far removed from abracadabra. The sonic screwdriver is a sort of magic wand. Psychic paper is a sort of cheat in order to do stuff narratively. And there are certain justifications for it, but I think that it's overused and it becomes cheap and nasty. The problem you have with that is you create the certain rules which are allowed to be broken for these type of things, which are all part of the logic and the canon, and then you just throw them out because it doesn't really matter again. It doesn't matter if you've got a screwdriver, a bit of paper, or whatever. Anything can happen because you can do it with a spoon.
Yeah. And of course, I know everybody, and I'm going to say it before you all say it. Sutekh, well, he was an alien. He wasn't a god. The Egyptians might see him as a god, but he wasn't a god. He was an alien species. And RTD has got himself in knots about this. Never mind how he's depicted Sutekh. I suppose we really should start with Sutekh, though. I'll be honest with you, to join with the RTD era, because as you know, cultural appropriation is banned in this progressive era, but I still see Egyptology going on here anyway. So yeah, get over it, RTD. But this is a siren I was expecting when I heard about Sutekh. And where would you put Sutekh, the original Sutekh, in this kind of discussion about gods or godlike, or
Right. So I mean, I think there are a whole panoply of characters, not just in Doctor Who, but across science fiction, who, for whatever reason, are seen as gods because they are enormously powerful. This goes back to the Arthur C. Clarke quote about any sufficiently advanced civilization would appear to be doing magic, because that's what it is. Sort of like it looks to the observer as if it's magic. So the ancient Egyptians see what Sutekh does, and they go, "Oh God," because he's doing magic, and that's a perfectly normal trope in science fiction. It's used well in Doctor Who throughout its existence. So, for example, you have in the face of evil the Doctor himself being seen as a god and
Yeah.
worshipped as a god because of what he did originally. And I'd say that's perfectly fair enough, and that's exactly parallel to what happens with Sutekh in the Pyramids of Mars. But it's not good enough for RTD, or it's too good because he's not capable of writing something which, yeah, I mean, sort of let's be honest, the puzzles at the end of the Pyramid of Mars are not exactly the greatest, but they have a logic to them about being solved, not suddenly someone finding a spoon somewhere.
Yeah, and I can cope with godlike powers with godlike power to lesser mortals. So Sutekh falls into that category for me. Yeah, where I think we all, as Doctor Who fans, love the moment. I think it's in part 3 when the Fourth Doctor enters the Sutekh's lair. And he realizes he can be atomized. He's an ant, he's a termite, he's a plaything of Sutekh. And you go, wow, and I can shatter your spinal cord. I can do whatever I want. Now, that's godlike power. And that thrills a Doctor Who fan. That thrills somebody to see how the hell will my hero get out of this? But it's only because he's got a lot of power. He's not a god. So there's obviously going to be something, a flaw, something where you can trick him. For example, Sutekh wasn't a god, but I love that moment that you could break his concentration. That sort of thing. If he was god, I'm not quite sure where you go with that.
Yeah, this actually brings us back to the problem of what is a god. Is actually here the use of God in terms of Doctor Who, it has become just something that is enormously shorthand for something that's too difficult for Russell to explain, that's too difficult to fit into the narrative, and therefore the rules don't apply. So it's actually a god of story, or it's like Russell. And again, sort of like the parallels are there. If you watch that Imagine thing about what Russell thinks he's doing, if he did the Toymaker, it's because he thought he had a bunch of toys to play with. This is Russell being a god.
Yeah, it seems to be exactly. It seems to be psychological, doesn't it? But you see, with the original Sutekh, he was painted in the script as a being of pure destruction, imprisoned by his own kind for his threat to all life. I was looking up in the Target book, describing his psychic influence over humans, making him a god of fear as much as power. The trouble is, you fast forward to the Empire of Death, and all that's thrown away. You lose the nuance, you lose the complexity as well in this new Who era. So I see Sutekh the original as a kind of narrative heavyweight because he really does have a dose of jeopardy in the plot, but you can see a way you can outwit him. It also serves really well when you can see the Doctor looking troubled when we're in up against Sutekh. But we have the Toymaker, and I know we could have the story of the Celestial Toymaker. We will show you that version, everybody. But the latest version of the Toymaker was, of course, the Giggle. And again, we had a character being changed. So first of all, would you say the Celestial Toymaker was a god?
I mean, by Russell's definition, yes. In the sense that it's not constrained by rules. Although, of course, you then get, which is true of quite a lot of gods in fiction and mythology, that the god is brought down by the rules that he imposes upon himself. So playing the game and losing, it's a classic, trickster god flaw that they get brought down by. But again, then to have something that is hugely jeopardy and it's three guys, but two guys working together, throwing a thing about and catching it. Really?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I'll see what the thread say as well about can we live with the Celestial Toymaker? Because that was the original, wasn't it? Where if you challenge him to a game, he's conflicted. He's obliged to play. So there's his flaw. If you're clever enough to do whatever. I just felt though that, as you say, whatever you want to call that, pitch and toss or something, when they end up just playing that kind of, here's a ball, can you catch it? I mean, I would have thought a god could extend his arms. I thought a god, if the Doctor can bi-generate, I would have thought the Toymaker would have had an army, a bit like he had in the Celestial Toymaker, where he brings lots of dolls alive and that. I don't know why suddenly we just said, oh, I'm a man on my own with 2 arms.
Yeah, I'd to have it. You know, there is something I think reasonable in terms of having a pathetic end to something like that, but I don't think it works whenever you're spending that amount of money, and you have to do it very rarely. And I think Russell makes the cheap point too often, for laughs quite often.
Yeah. If you're going to go for God, RTD, and all that power, immortality, omnipresent, malign influence mostly, then maybe let's not make it into a comedy. Good to see Stephen Genie Frith. New names for me. Hope you like what you see and you've subscribed. I like the Toymaker, but not really the other gods. Okay, maybe Lux. Lux, I think the story helped it for about 25 minutes. The Toymaker, it's not my favourite original story, Hugh, the Celestial Toymaker. No. I don't like surreal. I'm sorry, I struggle with surreal stories. Mind Robber's the same. I'm
I think these stories tend to be more admirable and trying something new and thinking, okay, we're going to try stuff. And you know, so like we've had previous discussions about the fact that I have quite a lot of admiration for the Web Planet, but I would never say to someone, you should watch the Web Planet.
No.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. But yeah, so I think you've got that type of thing where you are experimenting. There's quite a lot of experimental television at the time. Obviously, you've got The Prisoner, you've got the Avengers doing stuff that trying to push the narrative in different ways. And I think it's fair enough. But the other aspect of it is that it doesn't. The original doesn't come down effectively and say the Celestial Toymaker is a god. He's just I always thought of him as a sort of like bored student with lots of power, which is typical of the Star Trek one, because you're now talking about Hugh.
I was about to speak a sentence that Peter Harrington, my Doctor Who twin, has just typed. The Celestial Toymaker is more like the Eternals to me. Not a god, but godlike. Yeah, very like the Eternals. Would you say the Black and White Guardian as well? Where does that?
Yeah. Well, I think the difference is that the Black and White Guardians seem to be about something probably slightly closer to God, that there's some morality thing going on, and they are involved, and it's yin yang, etc. The Eternals are probably similar to the Celestial Toymaker in that they're doing stuff because they're bored.
Simon Mills, why Curse of Fenric better the Doctor playing chess across time and space? I think this is when, and you've already mentioned it, Hugh, with some of these godlike creatures, you have to build in a flaw. And so if it's a game, that's it. You've got your solution for part 4 if it's the old Who, or in the second minute if it's new Who. Trouble is, when it's a 1-episode story, it's so kind of obvious where we're going to go with it that I think it's ruined. And I just think, I'm going to keep saying it, I think we struggle by not having episodic Doctor Who anymore, because everything will feel like a reset. Everything will look as though it's been solved too quickly, because in essence it's been solved in 40 minutes, not 4 weeks. Mickey,
we're back at the fact that if you are going to do that and write an arc, Russell doesn't write an arc, because with both Sutekh and Omega in the last couple of series, they're just added on, and having Anita Dobson wandering about saying a few things is not an arc, Russell. It's not a fucking arc.
No. The animation, says Mickey, actually made the special effects better. It was really good. I watched the recovered Toymaker episode that was animated with the first Doctor. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad they've found them and all the rest of it, but yes. And of course, why drop Celestial? What? Because somebody's offended. I hate this world we're in now where we're all this nonsense. So, yes, the Toymaker, and this was, of course, the notorious story when they were trying to maybe edge out William Hartnell, weren't they? And force a regeneration by just disappearing him. Yeah, and he outwitted the producer. He managed to stay on. So, I'm going to throw one in now. The Great Intelligence. Where do you stand on that one, Hugh?
Again, to me, we're sort of back at the fact that you can get away with having something that appears to be almost has no flaws, but flaws. The arrogance in these cases is the flaw. It's classic hubris, afraid of gods, but you think you are a god, and that goes back to Greek mythology fairly clearly. And I think Great Intelligence is one of those ones where you've got a sort of hint of the supercomputer thing in terms of this, hence intelligence, and then also added on this arrogance thing. And again, that's another typical one of Star Trek as well, to do that. A lot of this is just in the original stuff throwaway. They are not defined completely, but for the purposes of the story, they are taken as not being gods because that's not significant to how it works.
Yeah, well, an interesting narrative point here on impact from Steve and Jeannie Frith. I enjoyed the original Toymaker, Sutekh, the Mara, the Trickster, but never for a minute did I think they were all linked. That doesn't feel right to me. It makes the universe feel smaller. And this is the other thing with a 62, 63-year-old show that I'm trying to argue more now, Hugh, about this, about whether you do a hard reboot or not. Because you preserve all this. It doesn't get spoiled. But I think the more we drag this kind of linear version of Doctor Who along, we are getting ourselves in more and more into a mess. And there's a point when you think, how many gods are in this blooming Who-niverse? They never come across each other. And if they do, it'll be fan fiction. I don't want that. I don't want the Pandoric and I don't want Stonehenge. You know, I think we can't win now because you've got the Mara, you've got the Trickster, it goes on and on and on. And for them all to live in the same universe, I don't know. I'm starting to not believe in all this anymore. You know, at least with Star Trek, I thought the Klingons are there, the Romulans are there, and there's a few rules about where the frontier is. I feel as though Doctor Who is missing that. It's been too haphazard. That was maybe the beauty of it for a while. But when you invent gods or godlike creatures, and they're littering the whole of the universe like space wombles, you really do need to have some logic or mapping out.
Well, I mean, Star Trek ran into the problem with Q, that because the Q was a collective, sort of like a pantheon, there were lots of gods all over the place. And despite the fact it was a great performance by John Delancey, it was overused as these things often are. He's sort of the master, but with too much power. And again, bold and sophomoric in terms of what his interests are, and that reduces all of the power. You compare that to the classic Star Trek, where you've got the episode Who Mourns Adonais, where it is a Greek god who has lasted to the future, but is an enormously powerful being with a power source, and the power source is mainly powered by the belief of people, which is strangely enough, it's Space Jesus again, except in this case it's Space Apollo. But at least again within that's how that gets defeated, and it's within the logic of a science fiction program. I think that you can have things in Doctor Who, you can have things in Star Trek which are not fully explained, but you can't have something that cannot be explained.
Yeah. I mean, the great intelligence evolved. I mean, they were a little bit like a cosmic parasite, the way they were shown in the 60s. Obviously, they came back in the name of the Doctor, for example, and seemed to be wanting, they've evolved and they were wanting more to affect the Doctor's timeline. Um, I quite like this godlike idea where they, a bit like the Time Lords aren't meant to interfere, so he has to play. Well, he used to have to play this game of don't say anything like in front of us, and only on special quests is he allowed to interfere. I love it when the gods like the Eternals can't really interfere, or the White and Black Guardian can't be seen to be taken aside, so they kind of have their quandrits, they have their robots, they have other people that they influence. It's a bit like colonization of people's minds. I like that version, but when the godlike thing is omnipresent and can appear everywhere. I mean, look at the Toymaker in the Giggle. He just appears, does a little dance, spice up your life and clears off again for tea. Nah, that's a bit naff. What did you think of the updated version of the Great Intelligence? Did you recognise it, or did you think you just?
I think it's at least recognisable again because of the evolution thing, and this is perhaps one of the odd things about a more traditional view of God, not a Greek one, but a Christian one, is that God can't really evolve because if you're perfect, you can't change, and that type of thing I think is really problematic to this type of thing, and to one extent I think they almost missed a trick in terms of the update, because it shouldn't be the greatest intelligence; it should be the greatest artificial intelligence.
Oh God, how was it described in the Doctor Who magazine? The intelligence lack of a physical form makes it uniquely terrifying. It's a god without a face. So it needs to grab. Now, Barbara, one of your favourites, the Aztecs. So if we're going on the other version, sorry, by the way, just before we do the Aztecs and Unearthly Child and various things, I was going to say about the gods, I think it helps narratively and it helps the viewer if there is some sort of motivation behind them. The Eternals were bored. I mean, basically, they were so bored in their immortality that they wanted to play games. I get that. In a way, the Toymaker games, Black and White Guardian, it was all about balance of the cosmos. If you go down the Sutekh road, he just wants to destroy. Some want to have influence, some it's their ego. Which one really gets you going most as a reader or a viewer? Which one is the motivation that actually does grab you?
And again, sort of, whenever you look at it, there's the opposite question, which is what's the motivation which really turns people off? Because in some of this is, if you don't buy the motivation of the character, boredom I think works, and arrogance always does. I think how did Ruby Sunday come about doesn't.
Yeah. Chris Chatfield putting me right a little bit. Yes, you can have something that can't be explained. Well, that's true. It's just that I think I've become weary of a showrunner and a writing team who get away with not explaining everything every week. You are applying human logic and you're conditioning to a program about the alien experience. Typically human, but yeah, he said with humour. We've also got Jurf. I'd been saying RTD2 was like a Tumblr fanfic for the longest time. Now that RTD says Shooty's Doctor was a self-insert, yeah, I was right all along. You see, our cynicism has grown. We've become weary of it. And yet, if I flash up the Aztecs here, is this... I mean, this had to be educational as well, didn't it? Because basically we were learning about a culture. We had to go there with sacrifice. We had to... But the trouble is, we also then fall into that other one where the BBC, Hugh, tend to guide us a bit, which is blind faith is dangerous, to a point where religion will be cynical about, to the point where, because the Doctor's always on the side of science, isn't he?
Yeah, so I think in terms of something like the Aztecs, or indeed all the way back to an unearthly child, where it's fire being brought down from the gods, that old one in terms of motivation of humans, then what you've got is and it is in terms of those anthropological examination of what's going on, and it's not taking an opinion about whether gods do or do not exist. It's just taking the interesting thing to be the belief that people have and the cultural belief, and that's it's replicated whenever it goes out. So because it was doing historicals, you got that, and it's very much about what the culture was. And obviously, in terms of thing you do with the French Revolution, you have to look at some atheism and revolution. But you also, whenever you do the Web Planet, have that the Optera think the Menoptera are gods. That's what they've evolved from, and that's trying to create culture in terms of the worlds that we're visiting, and we see a widespread of what belief is, and I think that's fair enough, and that's reasonable, and that's sort of standard for science fiction. And in that sense, whenever you're looking at beliefs, you are looking at it as agnostic, that it's not about taking a position on the truth, it's about looking at the beliefs themselves, and they are existent.
It becomes a bit disappointing for me though when I see that there's a position taken. Really, I mean, if you like your science fiction, on the side of the Doctor, all these civilizations, whether real, as in the Aztecs, or whether an alien one that similarly has a blind religious faith, we're on the side of scoffing at them a little bit, which is, come on, grow up. I reference Planet of Fire, where they believe the volcanoes are God, and no. So here with the Aztecs, I'm glad we don't make it now, because we'd be a bit sniffy about a civilization, wouldn't we? It'd be all a bit too kind of, I don't know, pompous or whatever. But I just find...
I think sort of like you can't get away from what you're doing in terms of the 1960s with what the Doctor is, that educational aspect, which is very much the play school of which window do we through tonight, which door in the TARDIS do we open, which world do we come out on, and what do we learn. But we are, as the observers in 1963 UK, much more evolved than these people ever were, despite the fact that we might find Romans interesting, despite the fact that we might find Aztecs interesting. They are not as cultural as us. There is a cultural relativism that is inherent in what the BBC is doing at that stage.
Yeah. It's almost like we're missionaries of what should be right. Stephen Genie Frith. Well, the Aztecs wasn't so much religion, it was human sacrifice and barbarism, not just the Aztec religion, certainly not Christian. That said, the Aztecs didn't deserve what the Spanish did to them. Very true. I mean, I like these historical episodes. I'm just glad we don't make them now in this way, because the editorial content coming from RTD and others would be horrific.
Well, you look at what happened with Rosa Parks, which would be, it's not religious, but it's a view which is culturally embedded in certainly the BBC and its cultural output about what happened, and it was an utter mess.
As Peter here says, the Ogrons had their god, that weird blob in Frontier in Space. If you think about it, Doctor Who does like to make any species that blindly follows a god and make them pretty thick and backward, and that's done a lot. There's a real cynicism. There's no kind of embracing religion unless I'll not say the next bit. Life's changed. Not every religion's treated the same. Stephen Bellow, I love original black and white, but these color picks are great. I'd love a colorized version of this. Just look at it. I mean, absolutely beautiful. And as people were saying, Barbara looks beautiful as well in it. I mean, stunning. And yet, look at the set, everybody. There you go. Simple as that. There's your Aztec set. Workable, doable. So yeah,
Well, I mean, that's not a million miles away. Except for it's about 10 years earlier, but it's very similar to what they did with I Claudius. If you're going to present that type of thing, you just do it in a very simple set because it doesn't matter. You're not trying to show people what the buildings were really like because you don't have that amount of money.
yeah. Good to see you, Daryl Joyce. Last night I ended our show with your 2 minute video again because we were trying to fall in love with Doctor Who, and that helped. Fire. You see, this is it. Ignorance and believing in gods. We went down this for a while, which falls into this BBC sanctimonious position, I think, sometimes. So yeah, this whole idea, we have a religious zeal, we have this kind of belief in nature or the power of nature or something, and I will have almost godlike powers if I know the secret to fire. And that was the essence of the Cave of Skulls, really, wasn't it? Which is all right, no problem with that, really, in essence. But of course, this religious godlike debate goes in so many different directions. And please, as we're going, everybody, add your tuppence about where you think Doctor Who's gone too far, where you think it's utilized religion and gods okay. We mentioned, for example, that Sutekh and the way he was utilized works narratively. But what does everybody else think? Peter Harrington, for example, says Death to the Daleks. There's a world building with the city and the descent to those caves, with sacrifice to the said city, who is littered with core religions. Do you know, I haven't got any examples today, Peter, of that one. That's another good one, isn't it? They're like monks, aren't they? And yes, sacrifice. I show you Aztecs. I could have shown you the Exelons. Yeah, too right.
On the subject of monks, there's Moffat's use of the headless monks, which is a bit
Yeah.
bizarre.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. The religion, Moffat does something odd with religion in terms of that, which is both looking at it in a slightly more polite version, but still thinking it's a pile of crap and mocking it at the same time.
How was everybody with stuff like Planet of Fire? We knew it was the volcano that gave power. We knew there was no Logar and all the rest of it. They made Peter Wingard's character a bit of a prat, didn't they? He's so blind to all this. He's so gone. You'd think he was kind of, possessed in some way. I believe in Logar and all that. But he's given, when Doctor Who does it, sometimes they're really, people can have a strong faith. That doesn't mean they're thick. That doesn't mean they're stupid. It doesn't mean they're ignorant. But the trouble is, the way they're depicted in Doctor Who, they tend to have only one-dimensional character, and that is blind, ignorant faith.
I suppose one of the reasons why that is that the Doctor as a character is a character of doubt. So the Doctor is questioning all the time. Naturally, in every sense of that's what the Doctor is. He questions things, and that makes a form of faith difficult. I think the question sometimes is about whether someone is portrayed as not just stupid, but also being manipulated. Because again, as we were saying, I could probably go through pretty well every episode in Doctor Who and come up with something that relates to this. But in The Curse of Peladon, where effectively a monster is used to be able to have a structure in society, it's the bogeyman, and which is no different from some portrayals of the devil.
So is this going to be a problem? I mean, if Doctor Who goes on for 80 years or 100 years and continues to invent stories and that, and we have... in the end, you fundamentally have the battle between science fiction and that cynicism and that doubt, that healthy questioning, and blind faith. How many stories? State of Decay, it goes on and on and on. And Stephen and Jeannie Frith, there have been a lot of evil pagans in Doctor Who too. They've added the fact that Logar, it wasn't a volcano, it was a spaceman in the end, yeah. But fundamentally, doesn't it now hold back our Doctor Who narrative that it becomes now, more and more we do it, quite tired. There's two positions that can't meet in the middle. And they always seem to make people that believe in a god, or people who have a strong religious belief, they make them look very, very stoic, very determined, very blinkered, very conservative, and inflexible in thinking. Whereas, and what I'm going to say to everybody now is, but hasn't Doctor Who gone away from science fiction and it's now turned into the Doctor says, believe in the human spirit, believe in your emotion, believe in the inner you, and that will defeat anything. So basically, it's become magic again. It's become nonsense.
And one thing I'd say to balance the whole thing about science and religion is the dangers of science are something that Doctor Who deals with quite a lot as well. So effectively, Davros is the scientific devil.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about blind faith in a god. It's blind faith in anything that the Doctor questions. So I think there's a slight difference. I think the problem is a lot of it is then portrayed as the historicals showing people who lived in the past and weren't quite as civilized as we are in 1963 Britain.
Now the demons, interesting one because there was so many moments in that where you have, I mean, you distorted the church really to have the demon appear there. You also had a pagan festival. You also had the Doctor with his little remote gadget with Bessie taking the mick out of magic, saying, "You think this is magic? Away," and so they were playing around with what's magic, what's belief, what's science. I thought they got the balance quite interesting and right. Did you ever feel it was scoffing in Demons?
I mean, I think it's very much in the tradition of saying, because the demons themselves are effectively space people who have become gods or like gods to certain groups, and that's the classic thing that we've talked about, that in Arthur C. Clarke's quotation. I think the whole thing about it, you then have to overlay what's happening in outside Doctor Who. So you get, this is rural horror. It's the Wicker Man. It's that type of thing as well. So there's a movement of what's going on. I mean, interestingly enough, in terms of a lot of the stuff that's happening as well for this type, something like Sutekh, for example, is that's after Eric von Daniken and the Chariots of the Gods and all of that stuff, which ties in exactly with what Sutekh is.
You see,
And the demons.
yeah. What fundamentally was Azal, wasn't it? What was he in the end? I mean, in essence, he was. What was creating him? What created his arrival? What created his demise?
So I mean that to me, that's one of those ones where it's effectively magic. We're doing a bit of reversing the polarity here. Right? It's more or less saying abracadabra, but
Yeah.
I think within the base, that's reasonable. I see some Stephen, Jay have pointed out about Underworld, and yes, I mean classically, of course, the Time Lords would be seen by certain races as gods because of the amount of power. If you can travel through time, that may be one of the easy definitions of what a god is to the perception of someone who can't do it.
Face of Evil. You mentioned Face of Evil earlier. I have to say, it introduced Leela. It built that world up of the Sever team. We had the kind of, the evolution of the language to make this trick. But then you also had, as we all know, the mountain. In the end, it was carved out with Tom Baker's face on it. I'm discomforted by this type of story. I have to say, I don't know. I don't like blurring what God is. I know Star Trek did it, for example. I think there's an intro to one of the movies where everybody is stunned when they see the Enterprise rise, and they all go, oh, and then they feel as though they've now interfered with the evolution of that planet civilization because they've now seen a spaceship. Um, I just have a problem with when we make the Doctor. I know this is an accident, and I know, but I just don't like going there. The Space Jesus just whacked me, Hugh. I just don't like elevating the Doctor. I like the Doctor just to seem like he just knows what to do with that light bulb there, and if I do this with some circuitry, and if I use my brain here, it gets all sorted out. I don't like this kind of, oh gosh, we all revere you and all that stuff. It kills it for me, the story. It does.
I think if you do it all the time, it would be problematic, and that's what the Space Genius thing became. I think with this one, it's an unintended consequence of his action, and it's a, there's, I think a hint here of making the Doctor question how he treats things and how he does things, which is useful, and it's a bit like having the little guy on the chariot whenever you had a triumph in Rome saying, remember you're only a man. Because all of this adulation might go to your head and you might think you're a god, which obviously some emperors became.
Yeah. Eastland Burkholder, interesting point this, because of course we had the Pygmalion style plot for Leela. Leela explains she has learned to believe in science, not magic. She explains it to a superstitious woman in the Lighthouse story. Again, this is the position, isn't it? You go from savage to civilized. Savage, believe in a god. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I know in the 17th.
I think it's very much believe in the wrong god.
Well, yeah, that helmet with the glove on, that was like very problematic. But yes, but it introduced Leela, I suppose.
And again, sort of like if you look at it, and whenever we were talking about sort of the Cave of Skulls, there's a harking back to that because the 17, etc., have de-evolved back to that. So the science doesn't change what human beings are. The fact that we can do the science and we're able to build the rockets, and that this is State of Decay as well, the fact that we're able to do that doesn't stop us becoming superstitious and doesn't stop a lot of us being superstitious.
Yeah. Right, Threads, liven up Thread, give us a like, number 1, give us a subscription, number 2, and number 3, oh yes, Taskmaster, Pastor Nobly. The next thing is, where do you stand with the Time Lords? Hugh's referenced it, but of course, which Time Lords are we talking about? I don't mean Omega and all that stuff. I'm not even going there. But what I'm saying is, regarding the Time Lords, when you saw them in the War Games, they had that psychic ability, and they could haul the TARDIS back. Well, of course, it's their civilization, so they'll have all the mechanisms to do that. That's not godlike. It just means they're quite powerful, and it makes us humans look a bit pathetic. And they can appear from anywhere. Terror of the Autons, they can appear in a bowler hat, that sort of thing. Where do you stand on the depiction of the Time Lords? As you say, advanced species, powerful civilization, but John Yulden, he's in the thread now. He's having a night off from me. But John Yulden would say we need those Time Lords as a strong influence above the Doctor to give a hierarchy and a kind of to reduce the Doctor's ability to do anything.
And to give him something to rebel against, which is crucial. He, if we're talking about pantheon of characters rather than necessarily gods, he is the rebel against that hierarchy and exists because of it. I had discussed the last time whenever we were discussing Madness about the fact that I think that the Time Lords use the mad and rebellious Time Lords to extend their influence. Hence, they can send them to something like Genesis of the Daleks because that besmirches their belief in themselves.
Yeah. Peter Harrington, the Doctor is so powerful today and no longer a simple traveller for me. Okay, some may see it, but not everyone sees it. It's it diminishes. Paul, that is really generous of you. Very nice. You know, when you sometimes feel as though you're working against the tide, the mic not working and everything, and it scrambles my brain. So thanks for that support. I agree. Religion and Doctor Who should not be blurred. As a Christian, though, I felt they did it well in Curse of Fenric, with the Reverend losing his faith when the bombs started falling. Yeah, there was some great in that one, and may I say thank you very much properly. There's a way I do it here. You know what it is. Yeah, did you like me being a god then? I like being a god. It's very good. Eastland Berkholder, but Brendan, there's a spiritual reality. There is something. Something's beyond what we can explain with science, which is very like as when you quoted Arthur C. Clarke, wasn't it? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and therefore, from an earthly child onwards, we suddenly think, is it a god or whatever? I see what you mean.
I think there's a central aspect in the storytelling that has to be emphasised here, is that nothing, no matter how scientific you are, or no matter how advanced you are, no matter how rational you are, that's not going to tell a story, nor is it going to provide a solution, because it won't tell you what you want to do. There is no decision making process in science, because you have to decide what you want before you do that. You have to have an aim, and that is emotional, that is passion, or to badly quote Blaise Pascal, the heart has its reasons of which reason does not know. And that's what should be driving the Doctor. Is not. Yes, he's interested in how do you do this, how do I make this happen, but he's not interested in it simply because of the cleverness of it, which perhaps you could argue the Rani is. The Doctor is interested because he likes entities, people.
Yeah. And now I delayed it for a second, but Omega said in the Three Doctors, I should have been a god. Now that's different to turning him into a god later on. He just feels as though he was devalued. He feels as though he was ignored. He feels as though he was not given the status he deserved. That is so different. Mind you, he had what power? I mean, it was amazing to be able to send antimatter blobs and antimatter, and of course that whole idea that in his world he could create doors, he could create a palace. There was that element there where he was god-like, but that's where I preferred him, Hugh. God-like.
Yeah, so I think that's a perfectly rational thing for someone like Omega to be. This is what I was talking about with Memento Mori in terms of Roman sort of like generals. Is you have to be reminded that you aren't a god. You don't get there, but no matter how great your achievements are, and I think a lot of it there is Omega's someone who didn't feel they had enough gratitude and then becomes bitter about it, and that then becomes the driving factor. And obviously the metaphor there is that as he's physically eaten away by the world that he's created, he is emotionally crippled by that hatred and upset.
What I'm also interested in is if he's godlike in his own world, this antimatter world, he's like a god there because his willpower sees it. Why did he want two little BAFTAs with him? I mean, he's got them two little BAFTAs. You could have anything you want. You can will anything, Omega, within reason, but I want two little BAFTAs. Oh, that's nice. I mean, get furniture. I don't know. He should have gone to a few furniture shops, I think. Anyway, there you go.
I can just imagine having the antimatter version of that Green Lady picture that everyone in the 70s used to have.
Yeah. Now, where does everyone stand on this one? This is when I just think it gets too... The Impossible Planet was a lovely episode. The Satan Pit, dealing with possibly Satan, possibly a god, Doctor against God, whether you felt the jeopardy. I lost it then. I always thought, well, who's down that pit? Exactly. That's fine, but I don't know. I do lose it. Does everyone get the gist? Brendan struggles with when they are gods or when you're up against what is seemingly a god. I just struggle with it. Were you all right with this one, Hugh? Satan pit?
Again, we're back at sort of like what does God need with a spaceship, a TARDIS, thing breaking out? Okay, he's been imprisoned, and you've somehow done this. This is, again, the mythic thing of the warrior that can't be beaten, who 1,000 armies come together and somehow lock up, and there's we've had that in New Who with that one of Chibnall's and Can You Hear Me? Zillan with the fingers, again, whose partner gets locked up, and you go, how does that happen then? How do you just not get out? And I think it's that sort of problem, because you've then created a logical problem that is not really science fiction. And with the Satan pit, you have the fact that, in theory, or at least postulated by the Doctor, is that he is the Khaled's war god, this Satan, because he has horns.
Interesting. OT says here, I want to see more demonic and mythological themed monsters. We don't always agree. That's allowed, isn't it? That's always allowed. Kinder. I mean, we did that with our mental health discussion. I remember when we had the Kinder there and the not we and all the rest of it. To be honest, the way this was the bit I didn't think landed, Hugh. I really didn't think this kind of, and it's just like the world's turning, oh, she's dead, or she's alive, and it's like, please. I really felt for Todd, Neris Hughes. I thought I liked the science bit. All this kind of, the snake bit, I get. And I think the most thrilling bit wasn't the Kinder and wasn't that old lady, the wheels turning. I thought, give her a hamster. It was this. It was this element.
Yeah. And again, it's sort of like, to an extent, that's this type of stuff you were saying you don't like, because it's the surreal stuff.
Yeah.
But it's done with a slightly more different aspect. And again, we're back at a god trying to escape. I think I really like Kinder, but I think I like it for the fact that it doesn't. It has the god existing because the people worship a god. It doesn't say it is a god. So it has that ambivalence, and it can get away with it.
Yeah. And I could see how, enlightenment and all the rest of it was brought to mind. Where do you stand on Kronos then, Time Monster?
Well, apart from being one of the worst serials of Doctor Who ever made, the one that I quite often run up to if I'm going through them all and think, have to do the Time Monster, oh God, I've got to do the Time Monster. Again, that's very similar to this whole thing where you have an immensely powerful being, which is the explanation for something in mythology. It's related to the old Daniken thing. It looks at it from that point of view. And it becomes easily usable by Doctor Who because of the time traveling stuff. So you can see both times, and therefore you can see why that happens.
Yeah, I'm testing that.
What I'd be interested in seeing, obviously, is to see how that stands up.
Yeah. And there's the gods of Ragnarok. You see, we had inclusivity then, everybody. Look, one of the gods of Ragnarok was a woman. There you go. You see, it was all happening. Extra research by Brendan there. So, the gods of Ragnarok, the greatest show in the galaxy. I call it something else. Sorry, Andrew Cartmel. Opinions are opinions. But it's because I don't like the god stuff. It's just, it really rubs me up the wrong way. So basically, the gods of Ragnarok, where do you stand? You've mentioned them a few times earlier. You've mentioned the Andrew Cartmel plan. He was trying to do quite a lot of things, and a lot of them I applaud. Go darker, go more mysterious, get that kind of vagueness and ambiguity back about the Doctor. Where do we land with this?
Well, as you know, we've reviewed this, and I hate it. I think this is my most hated CEO of Doctor Who ever in anything, because so much of what we see in the last couple of series goes back to this. So much of Space Jesus goes back to this, because he's battled the gods of Ragnarok through time. Why have you been battling? What have they been doing? This again, there's this. If you think that playing sort of like throwing a ball about is trivial in terms of the Giggle, dear God, the stuff that goes on here, or dear gods, or dear dogs, or however you want it, dear Sutekhs, the stuff that goes on here is utterly trivial and utterly sad. It is absolutely appalling, and it is the start of so much of the bad stuff that we see now.
I give Andrew Cartmel, I've got your book. I believe it. I believe what you were trying to do was well intended. We all make missteps. Some of us will think it was a misstep in one or two cases. It's one of those things, isn't it? It's hard. It's hard. The thing is, there's also the budget you're running up against, isn't it? And you know, when you talk about McCoy with a catapult and trying to do juggling and all the rest of it to try and please the gods of Ragnarok, I must admit, if I was that malign and that all powerful, I'd want more than a juggler. End of peer act. I think I'd want a bit more entertainment. I'd have my Netflix on Universal. I'd have my Amazon.
How'd you kill everyone in the circus? Go for the juggler.
Well, exactly. But isn't it? Now that's the restrictions of a BBC budget and all the rest of it, isn't it? I know, but you think if you set up narratively gods who are not easily pleased. Yes, you've got Sylvester McCoy, who's got a bag of tricks and he's eccentric and he do loads of things, but getting the spoons out's not going to hack it.
Spoons again. You see, spoons ruined Doctor
Who. Eastland Burkholder, I dislike psychics in sci-fi as much as Brendan dislikes gods on Doctor Who. Too often done badly. Yeah, I just think I like things done well. Here's the Eternals and the Black Guardian. I kind of like the Enlightenment idea. I don't understand. The more you look at the Black and White Guardian, the more I think it falls apart. Because we can't be seen as interfering. We can't be seen to be pushing our side of things, but we're going to always do it. But the Black Guardian's always up to trouble. So then you think, well, the White Guardian, get your act together. You know, you sat there, you know, in some wicker Hannah Gordon style bloody ITV schools and colleges bloody wicker chair. Get your act together, White Guardian, you naive prat. The Black Guardian, never mind your head, you know, the bird on his head, he's working away all the time. If you want balance in the universe, the Black Guardian's working hard while you're sat on your backside with your cocktail, you prat.
Yeah, and yeah. So again, I suppose it is this whole thing of balance and stuff like that. The question is, are they actually just two different sides of the same entity? Stuff like that's why there's not that much worry from Cyril Luckham, I think, who plays the White Guardian, who's very good in the Omega Factor with Louise Jameson as a baddie in the late 70s. I think to an extent, you know, this is sometimes Doctor Who is clever and it works, and sometimes Doctor Who is clever and it doesn't work, and this doesn't work.
The thing is, though, if you've the White and Black Guardian, if it's a great invention for Doctor Who's Who-universe, I know I hate the phrase, but once you've invented them in that universe, then to be quite honest, every week you can almost expect that it should be around. But if what we're saying that the Black and White Guardian only appear when a scriptwriter decides to think, come on, these are the top notch. I think, am I right, everybody in the thread? There's nobody above the Black and White Guardian. So what, they've only appeared twice? Gosh, they're bloody lazy. What they're doing, I'm sure they're bored. So I don't know. I like the Eternals. I feel like they were a layer below. I like that idea because they were like the old-fashioned Time Lords that could read your mind. I love that idea with Tegan when he was. I know it was like sexual flirtation, but there's an element of he was trying to get to know her, and there was all that going on. And yeah, I get the boredom, and I love the idea. Look, can everybody look at that?
Yeah.
This is what they were doing. Wow. I mean, please, sometimes you don't need an upgrade at all. I thought the effects in Enlightenment were great.
Yeah, it's not the first, and it won't be the last time that you have large scale sailing ships used in space because it's a spectacular visual and idea.
Yeah. Do you know the more shows? I think this is the 351st show. I'm not counting, but YouTube tells me. Ethan Burkholder and Lee Smith, they work you out. Brendan, as a god, would not want wicker chairs or jugglers. You might want velvet and satin fabric, so I don't know about that. Lee Smith, Brendan is pro pillars but anti wicker chairs. I've worked out that I love pillars. I'm obsessed with pillars. I even sleep on a pillar. Hey, sorry. Yeah. So there you go. The Eternals, eternally grateful for being given a chance to do a story. But that was our kind of gallivant around the godlike universe. You're up to many tricks. He's like a trickster who you know, everybody. Oh, I texts me and says, do you want to do a topic that's got 2,000 characters in and we'll do it in about an hour? He's a devil. He's a devil, not a god. He's a devil.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. I mean, I think there's the elements of that it can come back if we were looking at specific things, but I did want to look at it in terms of what it means for Doctor Who and for science fiction whenever you do this. And as I say, I think the last two series have been a complete and utter waste of time by Russell because it ruins everything. There are no rules. There are only spoons.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, my question as we get to the very end here, Hugh, is would the world of Doctor Who be better without the godlike characters in? Now, I know that's a hell of a question and it's not for 1 minute, but because I just find they tend to diminish the Doctor, because how can he compete? How can it kind of devalues the Doctor? It's fantasy rather than science fiction, which is, I think, really my bugbear. So, my rhetorical question to you all, everybody, and of course, because we're concluding, you just have to give us a yay or nay. Would the world of Doctor Who be better without the godlike element, without the gods? Oh, Hugh, it's a yay or nay.
Well, I mean, I think if you by that you mean the things that are not just tremendously advanced civilizations, then yes.
Yeah, better without. Well, I don't think I need to really explain everyone. I might like Sutekh in the old version. I might like various things, but I find them tired plots sometimes. This kind of conservatism, tradition versus critical questioning. It's like, yeah, we know where we're going to go with this. Enlightenment will happen. I get a little bit bored. I'm not easily pleased. Yeah, yeah. Pillars, no, not easily pleased. So I sometimes get in the mood when it comes to this, Hugh, and that's why sometimes I feel like wanting to do this. And this is your favourite Who pet, the Barbara one. There you go. I thought we'd just finish that one off. So, Hugh, thank you for your time. That was
Very.
Well, we gallivanted around the Doctor Who universe, and people agreed or disagreed and went, "What?"
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's quite good because I think we covered so much ground that there wouldn't be anyone listening who didn't agree with something and who didn't disagree with something.
Yeah, we do need that. I always wanted Sense 3 to be a little bit like a range of Doctor Who fans in a pub, not all agreeing. Oh, yeah, you're good. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we're debating, proper debating, although debate is dead, isn't it? Debate seems to be dead. Ethan Burkholder, make them unexplained, godlike characters that no one understands. That is how it should be. I love mystery and ambiguity, I
Yeah.
don't like, but I don't like a lack of explanation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? The difference that you can get. This is what I'm saying. You can have things that aren't explained, but I don't think you can have something that in science fiction that cannot be explained. If you had sufficient time to do so, because otherwise, it's not science and it's not fiction.
This is magic. Look at that. Garbage is telling me off. He's telling me off for not using the handle. I just thought that. Do you know what? They own me. They own me. I don't have a like. Right. Okay, everyone. I may be on tomorrow. I may not. I may. Who knows? Right. Thank you, Hugh, for your time, and thanks
Thanks,
everyone
everyone.
for joining us. Please like, subscribe, pass the word, tell other Whovians that there's a little channel called Sense for You. Bye, everyone.
Bye.